Hello. So most of you, or some of you at least, know me as a professor in the classroom. But about a year ago, I mostly spent my time in a bookstore. It was my bookstore. I ran a little bookshop. I know I'll stop the writers and readers in the audience who are starting to salivate right now. It was a very small operation. It was 250 square feet, so maybe the size of this carpet, no, a little bit bigger. But the beautiful thing about the bookshop was it was in rural northeast Pennsylvania. And so because of that, the rent was very low, and so were the stakes. I filled this room with my favorite books. And only my favorite books. So it was very prescriptive. Somebody could walk in and they could ask me a question, and I could pull a book off the shelf and I'd read it. I could tell them everything about it and why they needed to read it. So the other side of running a small rural bookshop is that it is small and rural. And a lot of the time I spent in this bookshop, I was alone. Because if anybody's been in northeast Pennsylvania in the winter especially, it's a very quiet country. And there would be days where nobody would ring that bell and come in. And I was fine. I was in a room with all my best friends, right? I would sit there. I never got lonely. I was an only child, so I was well prepared for this moment. I would run my hands along the bookshelves of my dreams, and at any moment I could recall any of these characters. And I spent a lot of time thinking about, and the question I most often got was, how do you choose? How did you choose these books? And I thought about what they had in common, because I had modern poetry, I had fiction, I had memoir, I had essays, I had everything. But the one thing I kept coming back to, the answer was voice. Each of them, when I would come to them on the shelf, would put their hand out and ask me in. And it was as if they were a real body, right? Thinking, just looking at the spines could create this relationship. And so to me, they're asking me to step into their shoes, the main characters. And that is what we talk about in my classroom, empathy. Now just think about the difference between empathy and sympathy for a moment, just so we're straight. So sympathy is something you can have, right? A doctor can have sympathy for a patient. But empathy is something you feel. So you feel it in your own body when this character goes through something. And you feel like you are going through it. You feel those emotions. When I was at the bookshop, this very exciting study came out. Well, I was thinking a lot about empathy and doing research, and it turns out empathy is one of the probably most sought after ideals of our contemporary culture right now. When the scientists study successful students, right? Empathy up here. When they study successful leaders, capacity for empathy, generally high. When they study, there's a big happiness thing going on right now. How do we create happiness? How do we stay happy? The people who are generally happy and can remain happy, empathy up here. So again and again, empathy is an important aspect for success, period. The problem is that nobody can figure out how to teach empathy. Either you are or you're not. It's sort of like being nice, right? So this study came out while I was in my bookshop, Googling around since nobody was there. And it said, it was from the New School, and it connected empathy with reading. It was one of the first studies that said, we can prove a link that you can read and become more empathetic. So of course, as a bookseller, I rejoiced, because books can save the world. But it was interesting. Not all books, and this goes back to the idea of why my books made the shelves. So they split the participants into 4 groups. The first group got no books. Sorry, guys. Everybody was tested for their baseline empathy first, right? So then these folks over here got no books. They retested their empathy. What do you think happened? Nothing, right? It just stayed exactly where it was. Group 2, you got textbooks, how-to books, a dictionary maybe, So you learned stuff, but what happened to your empathy? Kind of just sat there. So it was good, you were learning, you were a little more invested than this group, but your empathy didn't do anything. So group 3, you guys got the fun stuff. You got the beach reads. You got Danielle Steele. You got the stuff at the airport, right? You got these plot-driven novels that are sort of like popcorn, right? You just keep turning the pages, keep throwing it in your mouth. What do you think happened to your empathy? Negligible. In scientific terms, not much. There was a little uptick, but not a whole lot happened. The 4th group, you guys got the heavy stuff. This is what you would be reading if you were in my classes here. You got the character-driven literary stuff. So you got Louise Erdrich's The Roundhouse. You got DeLillo. You got Dickens. What do you think happened? Your empathy skyrocketed. Suddenly, by interacting with these characters who are inviting you into their bodies to experience things, your empathy jumped. So I sat there in my bookshop and I thought, okay, well, here's the connection. Strong voice makes a good book. Empathy makes strong voice. So I should be able to do this, right? The other way that I spent time in that little bookshop was writing my own work. The problem was, even surrounded by all of these books, I was blocked. Now, I don't believe in writer's block. I told some of my students this yesterday, and they all got a little nervous. But I do believe in voice block. And what was happening to me, I would come to the page, and I would write, and I'm mostly a writer of nonfiction, and I would have all my facts. But the voice would get clunky, or the voice would get shrill, or the voice would get angry. And I kept thinking, this is not me. This is not me at all. So around the same time, I read a piece by this woman, Dina Kaplan, who's an entrepreneur. Again, I'm reading a lot because I'm trying to up my empathy, right? This entrepreneur, she decided that she was going to do a week of silence, a silent retreat. And what she didn't realize is she had to sign this form that said, you will not kill, you will not steal. She was like, no problem, I can sign this. You will not lie. She sort of stopped, and she said, well, I'm going to be silent for a week. What's the harm in that? I can't lie if I'm not talking, right? So she went through the week, but the surprise at the end was that they asked her to sign these tenets for the rest of her life. And she did, and she took it very seriously. She didn't exactly think of herself as a big liar or anything, but she knew that the lying was going to be the one that would be tough because she wanted to take it seriously. She wasn't even going to have white lies, right? So what she found, of course, what you would imagine, oh, I'm sorry I was late. There was traffic on Harrisburg Pike, right? Lie. Oh, I'm sorry I couldn't do the assignment for whatever reason. Lie. We know. So what was really fascinating to me about her process, though, was she was finding the lies would be out of her mouth before she even realized she was deciding to make them. So her issue was recognizing when she was lying. So I thought about that, and I took that little nugget back to my work, and I said, okay, I'm going to see if I'm lying. Maybe this is what my voice block is about. So I went through my pages of my essay that I was working on, and I'm pretty religious about my facts with nonfiction. I like my reader to be able to trust me. I like things to be right. And I was going through my facts, and sure enough, everything was pretty good. Then I went back to those sentences that were sort of sticking in my craw, ones that just were not me. And I realized it wasn't the facts, it was the emotion, the more expository sentences, how I was feeling. And I tried to reverse engineer what I did on the bookshelves. Instead of when I would come to the bookshelves and these sort of figures would shimmer out to me, I tried to imagine what narrator would come out of my essay. And what I found was this moment in my life that was going on that summer. So we had this resident bobcat that hung out at my farmhouse, and bobcats are kind of big. And I have two little boys. One was about 1 year old right at that time, and at one, you could literally be carried off by a bobcat, so this was a true threat. And this bobcat would come by every day around the same time. And my two little boys and I would stand at the edge of our bluestone patio. And do you know what to do if a bobcat comes near you? You have to get really big and go, right? And we would go, bobcat alert. And we would get really big and mean and get away, right? When I was reading my essay, I kept getting this feeling of anger. And I realized, well, of course this isn't working. If a reader feels this from me, if this is what I'm creating on the page, they're not going to want to take my hand, right? They're going to want my anger is going to pin them to the wall. My anger is going to make them do basically what the bobcat did, which was, all right, crazy lady, I'm leaving that little munchkin alone, and just ignore me and walk away, right? They're going to close the book, put the essay away. Jane Goodall was here a few years ago, and she talked about, especially in activism, the importance of storytelling, needing to tell story to bring someone closer to you. Anger is going to push someone away. If you've got your finger pointed at someone, that you're pushing them the other way. So again, I brought this back to my essay, and then I thought, all right, well, it's not facts. I can't really do anything about this. So I thought about the essay itself. And this essay was about a car crash I had. And it was up in rural Pennsylvania. So anybody who's driven up there knows that in the winter it can be pretty slick. And this particularly slick January morning was gorgeous. That winter it had snowed pretty much every day. And this was the first day that it wasn't snowing. And so I remember it was morning, and I remember thinking, oh great, I don't have to worry about slipping on the roads today. And so I came out, and I was alone. I was going to a library for a reading, actually, a little rural library. And I was driving along, and I came around a corner, and before I realized, there had been a big drift across the road. And just like the lie that comes out before you realize it, my foot was on that brake. Intellectually, I know that's not what you're supposed to do. That's what happened. What was underneath that drift was ice. So the car spun, hit the embankment, flipped twice. I blacked out. When I came to, all I heard was silence, and all I smelled was evergreen. And I looked to my right, and in the passenger seat is impaled by an evergreen tree. And I was very confused, but that was where that smell was coming from. I realized I was upside down, so I got myself situated. I got out. I was in knee-deep snow, and we're in the middle of nowhere. It's just me. So I sit there and sort of stare at this gorgeous sky and this wrecked car and this broken 30-foot tree that just saved my life. And I look at myself and realize I'm fine. My glasses weren't even scratched. They were still on my face. My head hurt a little because I had bounced up and down like a pogo stick, right? And I had a concussion. But I was fine. So I went home, got better. The concussion was a little tough, recovered though. And I'm strong, so I thought I got this, no problem, I'm all right. Started classes in 2 weeks. The only problem was I couldn't drive. I would, even as a passenger, sit in the passenger seat, and if the littlest, slightest slip of the wheel, you know that feeling like when a horse's back leg sort of goes out? It could be mud. It would be in the middle of summer, and I would just freeze. It was grooved into my brain, right? This is what happens. I know what comes next. And I sat there, and I had other people drive me to the bookshop, and I had other people drive me other places for almost 2 years. So now I was sitting in my bookshop, and I was thinking about these things and about what was wrong with my essay. And I realized, I think I'm lying. And I realized in the essay I was trying to say, I'm not scared, right? This what is this really when I'm trying to go against a bobcat, right? I'm terrified he's going to eat my child, but what I'm saying to him is, I'm not afraid of you, right? And so I thought to myself, what is my biggest lie? And I got out my note cards. Now my students will roll their eyes because they know I love note cards. I got out my note card and I wrote, biggest lie, I am not afraid. Okay. That didn't really help me break my voice block though. Accepting that I was lying was only one part of it. So I flipped the card over, new sheet. Hardest truth. I'm afraid of being afraid. The idea of feeling your fear, I was okay with feeling fear. But for anybody who's had an anxiety attack before, you know that the scariest part isn't the attack itself, it's waiting for that next one. It's waiting, your body is primed, waiting to get that tingle, right? That happens right before an attack. The worst part, sitting in that car, it was helplessness, right? Just that insecurity and vulnerability of not being able to drive. But it was the idea that I was afraid of fear. And there was nothing I could do about that. If I had been just afraid of driving or afraid of snow, that's something I could work with. But because I happen to be a little bit of a control freak, I was afraid of fear. You can't do anything there, except write it down. So once I wrote that down and captured it and felt it and understood it, I went back to my piece and I wrote from it. I allowed that fear to come through. I allowed that vulnerability to come through, and I went from this to this, and soon after a few revisions was able to kind of get to this. Feel this fear with me. Feel this cycle. So I want to leave you with that note card trick. I want to know, what is your biggest lie? What is your hardest truth? And they may be some of the most important sentences you ever write. Thank you.